We are edging up on 7,000 subscribers. I cannot thank you guys enough, and I honestly can't believe it. So thank you so much. Without further ado, let's get to the video. So this is the first thing I want to touch on, and it's not necessarily any sort of mechanical problem or anything like that. So most of the Humvees that are going to be for sale from private parties at this point are going to be what you call A1 trucks. In other words, for the most part, these are M998 Humvees. Now, the reason that you need to make this distinction, and the reason that is important, is a few key things that are really going to be important if you're going to ever be, let's say, driving your Humvee on the highway or driving it to work or anything like that. The first distinction is the difference between having a 3-speed and a 3-speed with overdrive. The A1 trucks, M998s, they only have a 3-speed. And let me tell you, as someone who's driven one before and just knows how the first 3 gears work on my own personal Humvee myself, this is not enough for a daily driver for most people who live in America. The 3-speed will pretty much safely cruise at 45 to 50 miles an hour, and it'll top out at no more than 60 miles an hour. And at that point, the motor is really screaming at full tap. You're putting a lot of stress on it. It's going to be insanely noisy to the point where you have to wear earplugs to avoid getting any kind of hearing damage. With an A1 truck, for driving it long, extended periods of time on the highway, you're going to be putting stress on your motor, and you're going to be putting lots of stress on your ears. It's not a pleasant experience. The last major distinction is the older Humvees, the 998s, do not have a park. So you actually have to just put it in neutral and pull the parking brake every single time you want to park. This isn't that big of a deal. I'm more just telling you this so you can distinguish the two. That is a key and very easy marker, unless they've had a transmission swap or something like that, that you can tell if something's an M998 or a newer, an A2 truck like mine is an M1123, for example. If they do not have a park, it is an M998 or an A1 truck of some other variant, and that means that it's got the 3-speed and it's got the smaller motor. I highly recommend to everyone, they look into A2 trucks. Avoid the A1 trucks unless it's just going to be like a vehicle you drive around your farm or something like that. Obviously, the older trucks are going to have more age. Most of them are going to have more miles on them. They're going to have more crumbling and worn out, O-rings and seals and all kinds of stuff like that. But the funny thing is it seems like for the most part, the price of them is not much different than the newer trucks. So, I just want to watch out for you here. Make sure you get a good deal on whatever you're buying, and don't get into something that you're not going to be happy with. Okay, so the second major thing you want to look out for, especially when buying from a private party, are the Humvee flippers. Now, these aren't much different than people who flip houses and do a really bad job of it. Don't get me wrong, some of them do a pretty good job and they really know what they're doing. I think when you look on GovPlanet, you see how cheaply you can buy a Humvee for, and then you look in the private market and you see how much that they're going for. It's very tempting to buy a bunch of military Humvees, slap a coat of paint on them, slap some seats in them, and then go sell them and try and double your profit. Now, in reality, as someone who's actually built a Humvee and done it the right way, it is borderline impossible to make money on a Humvee that you bought off of GovPlanet unless you cut corners. It just costs too much money. I probably have 10 to 15 grand in my unit alone, and I haven't even done any engine work yet. I've simply just repainted it, Raptor line the inside. I've done new seats, I've put a soft top on it. I've done a few other mods here and there. I did do an engine cooling mod. I don't really consider that engine work, but I have done something with that. But I haven't done anything major to that truck whatsoever, and I've got tons and tons of money in it, to the point where if I went to sell it today, I would have a net loss. So you get these people that think they can make money, they buy a few Humvees, they slap a coat of paint on them, they do zero mechanical work, and then they just add 10 grand onto the selling price. Usually you can see this if the paint job looks bad, if the interior basically looks stock. Shoddy workmanship is usually pretty easy to detect, and there's plenty of Humvees out there that look like somebody with zero mechanical knowledge or respect for the build went through and modified them to make sort of a quote-unquote, let's say, zombie vehicle or rough military vehicle or whatever they want to call it. Just stay away from those things. You'd be much better off just buying a Humvee off of GovPlanet and doing the work for yourself and getting it to the point that they got it to and saving an absolute fortune. The street legaling process adds a lot of value. You know, I understand there's something there. You can look at my video on street legaling a Humvee. If you live in a red state that's fairly unstrict with the regulations, this is a lengthy process, but it's not an overly difficult process. So I would contact your local highway patrol, your local DMV. I would also do research to see how difficult it is to street legal a Humvee in your state. If you live in a state like California or let's say Michigan, it may be a better idea to buy a street legal Humvee off of a private party at that point, if those even exist over there. I've heard it's extremely difficult. Okay, so the next thing you really want to look out for are worn out gas and brake pedals and controls. You know, this could be the start button, it could be the shifter, it could be, let's say, the windshield wiper knob, all that kind of stuff. The reason I say this is because odometers on Humvees cannot be trusted. The military does not, repair really anything, they just replace. So the same scenario or the same, I don't know what you want to call it, logic applies to the Humvee instrument clusters. When the odometer goes bad, a lot of times they'll replace the entire cluster or they'll just replace the odometer itself, but they're not going to repair it. And what that means, since there's no really laws or regulations on military vehicles, is it can be a Humvee with 100,000 miles on it, and they just stick a new odometer in it that has 0 miles in it naturally because it's brand new. So you can't really trust the odometer. So what you want to look at instead is everything that would get any sort of wear and tear other than the seats by people using it. Like if the steering wheel is worn out, that's a pretty good sign that that Humvee's got at least 50,000 miles on it or more. Hard off-road miles, might I add. If the pedals are worn out, same thing. If the paint is all rubbed off of the pedals, obviously they've been used for a long period of time and a lot of people have driven the Humvee. If the start-stop switch is all worn out, the paint, you'll see a lot of times the paint on the back plate is actually completely worn off. That is a really good sign that the Humvee obviously has been started and stopped thousands and thousands of times. If the gear shifter lever itself is all worn out and the paint is coming off of that, same thing. It really applies to anything that a person in the interior would be constantly touching and applying friction to. Now, if the seats themselves are worn out, I say to ignore that because the seats on Humvees are terrible. A lot of times they sit outside for long periods of time as they wait to be auctioned off. Raccoons and stuff get into them. I really wouldn't worry about the seats. My seats, for instance, when I bought mine, were completely destroyed and basically unusable in any way, shape, or form. But look for wear on your Humvees. That's how you're going to be able to tell how much use they've had. Okay, so the next thing you're really going to want to look for is blow-by. Now, I got a lot of hate for this in another video because I didn't actually quite understand what it was. And if you ever say anything wrong on YouTube, trust me, people are going to point it out. I do appreciate the constructive criticism, so I don't sound like an idiot. Blow-by on a Humvee is what you see when you take off the oil filler neck cap, and you see little bits of, oil or moisture coming out of that. Now, the reason that happens is the pressure from the top end of the motor is getting into the bottom end. Now, I had several comments I received saying a little bit of blow-by is normal. It can happen with Humvees, blah, 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 blah. I understand that. My Humvee doesn't actually have any blow-by, but I would assume maybe a little bit isn't that big of a deal. But generally what would cause that could be things like you know, worn rings in the cylinders, maybe even something as bad as a cracked piston, whatever, some sort of wear and tear that is allowing the pressure from the combustion process to get into the bottom end of the motor. On GovPlanet, they actually have a column that lists this, and it'll tell you how bad the blow-by is, and they also make sure to show this in all of their videos. If a Humvee has bad blow-by, that means it likely has engine trouble, and you should avoid that Humvee at all costs. Starting behavior. Alright, so this is controversial because there's a lot of different boxes, and by boxes I mean start boxes in Humvees. You know, there's a lot of people who own Humvees that don't start very well, and they've never started very well. In my case, my Humvee always starts basically on the first crank. Maybe if it's really cold, it'll start on the second crank and idle a bit rough for 10 or 15 seconds. But my friend's Humvee is the exact same way, and his is even an older M998. In my opinion, Humvees should almost always fire right up unless there's some sort of issue with them. Alright guys, and those are the top 5 things that you need to watch out for when looking into buying a previously military Humvee. I really hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you can continue to support the channel. Once again, thank you guys so much for your love and support. We're probably over 7K subscribers by now. I highly appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one.